You know, a couple of weeks ago, I sat there and I had a word for the church. And I thought to myself, but you know, sometimes you get a word, but God doesn't push you forward to bring it. And I'm sat there thinking, what is it? What's going on? You know, and I sat that, and the end of the service came, and I didn't deliver it. And I was so disturbed by this, and I went to Pastor Michael, and I said, Pastor Michael, I said, I don't know what it is. I said, but I had a word for the church. I said, it's a very simple word. I said, nothing complicated, just a couple of minutes. He said, good, bring it as a message. And I thought, now I've got to extend a couple of minutes into a few more minutes. And I've actually preached around this message before, so for me, but it's totally different this time. So anyway. And what I want to do is I want to ask you something. You know, Jesus had a place to go to, and that was Jerusalem. He had to go there to go on the cross. But you know, we've all got a place to go to. Paul had a place to go to. His place was Rome. And it's very distinctive because we all got a place to go to. What I want to ask you is, where's your Rome? What place is God asking you to do? Now then, somebody says, oh, I'm not going to go traveling. No. It may not be traveling. It may be the fact that your place is to be the best parent that anybody could be. You see, people turn around and say, what is your job? They always think of standing up here preaching, doing what I do, going out on missions, or all these things. Hang on. There are things that we need to do within our families and be good at. So where is your Rome? Your Rome might be being the best employee at work and showing the boss that Christians can produce 150%, not 100%. It may be you have to be the best orderly you can be in a hospital. There are thousands of jobs that we can be called into. But the thing is, it's not the calling, it's being the best that we can be at it. And the scripture that God gave me was from Acts 23:11. And it says, and the night following, the Lord stood by him. Now this is Paul in prison. I will go through that in a minute. And he said to him, be of good cheer, Paul, because as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, you also must now testify for me in Rome. Hang on. Paul has been arrested. The whole of Acts 21 to 28 is an amazing story of what Paul's journeys. And in it, this verse, when I read those from 21 through to 28, this verse to me is the verse of the key of everything. We have Paul. His friends are saying to him, don't go to Jerusalem, it's not good for you. But Paul says, I'm going. And he goes. And when he's around, he starts to preach and teach, and he starts to talk about his Damascus Road experience. And unfortunately, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, they were not too happy with him. To such an extent that they set out to destroy him. And in the confusion that starts, a centurion has to send a squad of troops in to rescue Paul. And they take Paul away. But the centurion thinks that Paul is a terrorist. He doesn't realize who he is. And when Paul's talking to him, he says, hang on, he said, do you know, I'm a Roman. And as soon as he says that, the centurion has to think twice how he deals with Paul. But he knows if he lets Paul go, Paul's going to get murdered. So Paul says, hang on, he says, I want to go back and talk to these guys. So he goes back and he talks to them. And again, it's not too healthy for Paul. They're going to set about and kill him. So the centurion sends in the second time, rescues Paul, locks him in prison for his own safety. And this is where God turns around and says, be of good cheer, Paul, For as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, you must also bear witness in Rome. Paul's life is in danger, and God's turned around and saying, hey, sunshine, you're going to do all this again in Rome. How's he going to get there? But God's got a plan on everything in our lives. I want to tell you a story you may not think is relevant, but it is relevant. I was about, 12, 13 maybe. Maybe 11, I'm not sure. But this is only sort of 8 or 9 years or 7 years after the Second World War finished. And I'm in home. I've got 2 brothers and a sister. My sister's younger, 2 brothers are older. And unfortunately, I was a little bit mischievous. Mother found out I was being mischievous. And she told me to go to my room. When Mum tells you to go to the room, it means the cane's coming out. So I must have been extra mischievous at that time. But Mum was not in a very good mood. I remember this so distinctly. And I went to my room. And I'm stood there. And I'm thinking, this is going to hurt. So I'm stood there. And I'm looking out the window. And we had an air raid shelter in the garden. My father, because of his health, couldn't go in the war. He got refused on all the services. So he was there as an air warden. And we had a specific air raid shelter in our garden. Built of concrete. It was solid. It was Dad's now. It was Dad's workshop. His pride and glory. And a flat roof. Perfect for putting cans on the top. And with Dad's air gun, when he wasn't looking, taking pop shots of the cans, you see. So I'm stood there thinking, whilst I'm waiting, I could get the air gun. And then I thought, no. That will make it twice as bad. So I'm stood there, and I'll tell you, it seemed like ages, and I think it was ages, but Mum never came upstairs. And I'm stood there, and I look out the window, and I said, God, remember this, I'm talking about 1950s. So going to Africa was nothing. We wouldn't even think about it. The only people that went to Africa were the soldiers in the war. So I'm saying, God, if you get me out of this, I'll even go to Africa for you. The next thing I get, Robert, tea's ready. What's going on? Dad must be home. When Dad comes in, I'm in trouble. So I go downstairs, I sit down and have my tea. I ate properly. I held my cup properly. And I sat down after tea. And when Mum said go to bed, I went to bed. There was no, I want this, I want a drink of water, I want that. I'd done everything I had to do. The next day, man, perfect. I was. The day after that, I'm still thinking, when is this going to happen? It never ever did. It never ever did. Amazing. And in 1986, no, 88. Yeah, 88. I'm in church up in Chippenham. The pastor was preparing a trip to go to Romania. I'd grown up thinking that I was going to be an evangelist here in the UK. That was everything I was working to this. Right? As for traveling, no. I'm quite happy, keep my feet on the ground. I was in the Air Force, but I don't like flying. Anyway, that's another story. So I was going to be an evangelist. So the pastor turns around and says to me, because I was in transport and things like this, and he said to me, can you get this trip organized? So I organized the whole trip, got everything done, got the drivers. He was going, got the team all ready. And 3 weeks before the event, we got the church full of aid ready to go in these 2 trucks. And 3 weeks before the event, he comes to me and he said, got a problem. I said, oh, what's this? He said, I'm not going. I said, who's going? He said, you are. I said, no, I'm not. No way, Jose, am I going. And he said, yes, you are. I said, no, not. And he said, okay. Anyway, 3 weeks later, I'm driving down the motorway across Europe, mumbling under my breath, I don't want to do this. And I drive all the way through Europe, into Eastern Europe, into Romania. And I'm doing this not because I want to, because of obedience to the pastor. Purely that. I must admit, I was enjoying it a little, but I was still under obedience. That was my attitude. Anyway, while I'm there, it's there, in obedience to God, that God arrested me and put in my heart missions. That trip changed my life completely. For the next 8 years, I was in and out of Romania a couple of times a year, driving trucks all across Europe with aid. That was my driving force. 8 years I did this. You see, it took my obedience to do what my pastor told me to do, to go to Romania so God could arrest me there so that I could start my walk with him. Sometimes we have to do things so God can speak to us. Here's Paul in prison, and God speaks to him and tells him what he has to do. But whilst Paul is in prison, a group of people plan to murder him as soon as he comes out. And these Jews said, and they made a vow, I am not going to eat or drink anything until we have killed Paul. And what happens? I'll find my notes, because I'm way ahead of my notes. It's pretty good. And in fact, we could just read through it and then we'll see what he says. Acts 23:12. Going to go from there. And it says in verse 12, and when it was day, a certain of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under a curse, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. And there were more than 40 which made the conspiracy. And they came to the chief priests and the elders and said, we have bound ourselves under a great curse that we will not eat nothing until we have slain Paul. It's the longest fast in history. Now therefore ye with the council, signifying to the chief captain that he would bring him down unto you tomorrow, as though he would inquire something more perfectly concerning him, and we, or ever he come near, are ready to kill him. And when Paul's sister's son heard of their lying in wait, he went and entered the castle and told Paul. And Paul called the centurion and told the centurion. And we know then, and we can go on down to Acts 23:23. So the boys told them. And he called him 2 centurions, saying, make ready 200 soldiers and go to Caesarea. and horsemen 70, and spearmen 200 at the 3rd hour of the night, and provide them beasts that they may set Paul on and bring him safe unto Felix the governor. When I hear some people turn around and say God's spoken to them, I see panic comes in their eyes sometimes. How can we achieve this? Paul's in prison, and already 40 people are planning to kill him. And Paul knows about it. How is he going to get where he's got to go? Can you imagine? The supply comes. 200 soldiers, 70 cavalry, 200 spearmen. That's 470 warriors just to keep Paul safe. And then Paul didn't have to walk. As a prisoner, he wouldn't have to walk. They supplied him beasts to walk right on. Not one. It's in the plural what they supplied. When God calls you, he's already got the list of what you need. He's just waiting for you to say, I go. If I was to ask how many people are waiting to be called by God, a lot of people are going to put their hands up. But if you're waiting to be called by God, it means God's already called you. Because if you're waiting, you know in your heart you're being called. The thing is when you're going to step out. Your supply is there. Everything you need is there. You don't have to worry about a thing. So Paul is taken to Felix the governor. He's kept prisoner. He's then kept prisoner for another 2 years. He's still not in Rome. But he's still standing on the word. God said. He knew that no matter what happened to him, God said. See, had I not stepped out in obedience and went to Romania, God couldn't speak to me. Because he wasn't going to speak to me in my home. He had to get me somewhere where I could be arrested to speak to. And then we go on through. And we can read of the shipwreck that Paul undertook. We didn't undertake it, it happened to him. When they turn around in the shipwreck, they say they threw everything overboard to try and keep the ship afloat. Where's Paul? He's asleep. Everybody on deck panicking. Where's Paul? He's asleep. Why is he asleep? He's asleep because God has said you're going to Rome. So he knew there was nothing going to stop that journey. That was his confidence in his Lord and Master. And then Paul comes on deck and says, hang on, guys. This is my interpretation. Hang on, guys. You're panicking over nothing. Now then, you're going to have to go for a swim. It could be cold. Get some food inside of you. Get some strength. Jump overboard, and I'll see you on the shore. And it tells us the ship was wrecked and no one was lost. Not one person drowned. And whilst he's there in that island, he starts performing the miracles. He's not even reached Rome yet. You see, sometimes we don't get to our destination until we've done the journey. I had to go for 8 years in and out of Romania before I was even called to go to Uganda. See, God was looking at my heart to see if I was obedient to Him. I've been obedient to my pastor. Now I have to be obedient to Him. And it was in 1963. 1993. I'm in Tulsa, Victory Bible Institute. And I'm there. And we were split up as a Bible group into different homes for prayer evenings. And it's amazing because the leader of our prayer group was a pastor from Uganda. And he said to me, when are you coming to Africa? I said, I ain't going to Africa. I said, I'm not going. I refuse. And for how many years after that? I don't know. How many years did I keep getting invitations, Mary, to go to Uganda? I don't know how many years I refused and I refused and I refused. And I'm here one day in Bible school. No, before that, I'm working, still doing missions into Romania. This is going on now, and I'm driving a meat van in Reading because I have to earn my keep to be able to go and work as a missionary. So I used to take all sorts of jobs. Anyway, this particular, I was driving a meat van onto a farm in Reading, and I'm driving down the track, quite a long track, and I didn't want to drive down it. You know, I drove up the motorway fine, got to the farm, looked at the track, I don't want to go down it. This is inside of me. I did not want to go down it. I'd have quite happily dropped the meat off at the gate and driven off. But anyway, my job was to deliver it. So I'm driving down this track, and I had the most terrible unease about myself. Didn't want to go. Anyway, I get there, and I stop. I could not find anybody on the farm. What are you going to do with a truckload of meat? And all of a sudden, I go around a barn, and there's this lady sat there, sat on a wall. And I thought, that's strange. So I went up to her and I said, excuse me, lady. I said, is the manager about? She said, no. And I said to her, I said, excuse me asking you, but where are you from? Because it was a black lady sat there. And she said, I'm from Uganda. And she said, there are 15 of us here on the farm. And her words to me was, and we don't have a pastor. So he knew what I was doing for the next few months. And we would travel up sometimes there. It's amazing how God puts a picture together. But I can tell you this, that experience of me as a child, I did not remember it until about 6 years ago. I'm teaching in Bible school, and I'm teaching on missions. And all of a sudden, God has a conversation with me in my ear. And I'm saying to him, I'm teaching. And he says, you listen. And he says, do you know what you did as a child? No, I'm trying to lecture. And I'm saying, no. He said, you made a vow. I said, what? He said, you made a vow. He said, do you remember when you were a child, what happened to you? At this particular point, he said, when you went up to the room and you looked out of the window and you said, he said, I've called in my vow. Every time I've been working with God, every time I've been doing these things for what he's pushing me onto, he always has to arrest me, to tell me things. But are we prepared to be arrested? Paul had no choice. He was in prison. And we know from this, from this, you go all the way through to chapter 28, he went on to Rome. And when he got to Rome, he was there for a few years, but that was the end of his life. When God gives you a call, he may show you the end, but you don't run straight to it. There is always a journey. And it's that journey which is exciting. I know where I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to be doing. But I'm not grasping for it. I'm enjoying the journey as I go along. Be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified me in Jerusalem, so thou bear witness for me in Rome. See, God is always good. I was coming out of Romania one day. And we were driving along. We had about 500 miles to come from one side to the other. And we got to the Hungarian-Romanian border. And I go into this porter cabin, an old porter cabin, dirty, smelly, full of truck drivers. Some of them were bigger than me. I had to look up at them. I think I don't like being in here. Most of them were Turkish. And I go to the desk where this army officer sat. And I put my papers down, and all you had to do was, and then I go home, across the border. And he said, no. I said, what do you mean no? He said, no. He said, you must go back and see the mayor. He said, you go back and see the mayor, get a stamp from the mayor, come back and show me, then you can go home. 500 miles. A day across, back, and a day back. 2 days out of my journey. God gave me the dates for the journey. I knew when the boat was going to leave France to England. I'd miss it. I said, no. And he was not happy with me. He took his gun out of the holster and he put it on the desk and he said, you go. I said to the guy it was me, because we had two or three trucks, I said, get outside, get the guys praying around the trucks, we're going home. And he stood there and I stood there in silence. And things were now getting restless because the other truckers want their stamps so they can do their journey. And he said, go. I said, no. You send me home, stamp. And he said, go. And I thought, okay, Lord, you said. This was the dates. If I go, I'm 2 days over your dates. Your dates. With that, an army officer comes out of his room, and he looks at me, he looks at the guy, he said, problem. I said, he will not let me go home. He said to the guard, he spoke to him in Romanian, and then and he looked at me, he said, okay. He looked down at the guard, he said, stamp his papers, he's going home. Home. You see, I knew whose authority I was in. And I knew the timing that God gave me. He didn't say you're going to be 2 days over and have extra 2 days expense of fuel and lodgings and all the rest of it. And you'd have to rebook your boat. When God's with you on your journey, you have the confidence of knowing you're going to reach your destination. But it doesn't make any difference to the journey in between, because He has a journey planned for you which you will enjoy on the way. And you will have experiences which will build you and build your character and build your faith and build your knowledge. To such an extent, it doesn't matter because you know. God said, go to Rome. Paul went to Rome. Where's your Rome? What is God telling you to do? And that is my challenge to you. And that was the challenge I had with Pastor Michael to bring that word that morning, was there's a challenge on our lives. Are we going to pick up the challenge, or are we just going to puce it? Sometimes it can be a difficult message because all of a sudden God is saying, this is what I want you to do. Now get on with it. But I'll tell you something. And I don't care who else tells you, they'll say the same. When you accept that challenge, it's an amazing journey. You have your ups and downs. But it doesn't matter. This week I had a telephone call from Pastor Gerald in Uganda. I'd done a crusade there on the 3rd of December last year. Pastor Gerald was a student from this Bible school. He phoned me up. He said, Pastor, he said, I got something to tell you. I said, what's this? He said, when you were here at the crusade, he just started his church. This was his first week of church when I was there. So the numbers were very, very small, which was fine because they got to build. And whilst I was preaching, God stopped me and he said, speak this. And he said, tell the congregation there's a child at home which is very sick. And they were expecting the child to die. Forget it, the child's fine. I delivered the message. The next day, a woman came to me and said, that was my child you were thinking about. They are twins. They are both very, very ill. God had spoken. I'm not going to do any more because I might speak wrong. I had a message from Gerald to say, those two children, they are fine. And the doctors cannot understand what's happened to them. But see, God spoke. You've got to know where your room is. And you've got to start the journey. Because when you get on that journey, you will affect so many other people's lives. And you will set so many people free. And it's an exciting journey. You know, Auntie Mary gets angry with me sometimes. You're not going again. You're doing this. I don't want to stay here on my own. Blah, blah, blah. But she knows what type of person I would be if I didn't go. It's because the excitement inside that God has put in there that I want to enjoy this journey with him. See, Paul, when he was arrested, could have turned around and said to the Sadducees and Pharisees, he could have said, I'm ever so sorry. I do apologize. I upset you. I know I'm wrong. And he could have walked away. But he chose to be obedient to God. When you think about it, Paul was told to go out into the world back in the days of Damascus Road experience when Ananias came to him and told him that he had to go and take the gospel to the Gentiles. So all that journeys that Paul was doing was from that obedience of that day. This was to be a new experience for him. But the Bible says this to us in Matthew 28. It tells us, go into all the world and preach the gospel. Thank you, Pastor Michael.